Mr. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the financial statements and the budget report, with a number of press releases filling out the details of my proposals, will be available from the vote office as soon as I have sat down as well. I was making sure I had the honourable gentleman's attention. I congratulate him on his alertness. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have three priorities in my budget this year. First priority, to keep the economy on track to achieve the great prize of sustainable growth. This recovery offers the best prospect that the British people have faced for many years to enjoy the benefits of growth that doesn't pass through illusory boom to painful bust. My second priority has been to use this recovery wisely to encourage the creation of more jobs, particularly for people who've been out of work for some time. We must combine greater prosperity for the majority of our people with measures to prevent the emergence of a deprived underclass, excluded from the opportunity to work and dependent on welfare. And the third priority is to strengthen our economy in the longer term. We must aim for a modern economy in which the growth of enterprising companies will give people a greater sense of confidence in the flow of new jobs that will always be required to replace the old jobs eroded by technology and competition. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, the background to this year's budget is the healthy growth in output that we're seeing in Britain and overseas. The recovery has been underway at a modest pace for over 2.5 years, but it's now stronger, and output has grown by over 4% over the past year. And that's easily the fastest rate of growth of any of the major European economies. And the forecasts I'm publishing today with this budget show the economy expected to grow by 3.25% next year. As the recovery's got stronger, growth's increasingly come from exports. Over the last year, British exports have grown by over 8%. Investment in plant and machinery has grown by over 5%, and consumer demand has increased by a more modest 2 to 3%. And that's a very healthy shape for this stage of the recovery, and it bodes well for our long-term future as a competitive industrial economy. Our exporters have been able to take advantage of the pickup in growth overseas by keeping their costs down and raising their productivity. Our producers have succeeded in improving their performance in domestic markets, so that while exports continue to rise, imports are little changed. Overall, I expect our balance of payments on current account to improve by over £6 billion this year. And an improving balance of payments is remarkable for this country at a time when the economy is growing strongly. And more encouragingly still, inflation has remained low. Underlying inflation has fallen to levels that we haven't seen for a generation. Indeed, only about 1/3 of the adult population of this country have ever experienced such low inflation during their adult life. And the other 2/3 are still finding it difficult to adjust to the change to a low inflation economy. Unemployment. And they're not going to adjust back under the Labour Party either. Unemployment's on a clear downward trend, having fallen by over 450,000 since December 1992. The United Kingdom, as I've already said, is the only major economy in Europe where unemployment has fallen over the past year. The unemployment rate in this country is lower than the average for the European Union, and the number of people in work is rising. The labour force survey shows an increase of 226,000 in the number of people in work in the last 12 months. And that means real new jobs for people up and down the country. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we're seeing strong output growth, strong export growth, falling unemployment, an improving balance of payments, and low inflation. And this combination is almost unique in this country since the war. But let us be under no illusions. These promising conditions have to be sustained if they're to deliver higher living standards and secure jobs for men and women. And these promising conditions have only arisen at all because of the difficult decisions that this government has been prepared to take in recent years. We must not now throw away the gains that have been made by turning to some short-term dash for yet faster growth. Growth will only be sustained if we keep the lid on inflation, get public borrowing down further, and push ahead with measures which strengthen the industrial economy. That is the way to convert growth into prosperity and jobs. And that way lies the virtuous circle of improved competitiveness, rising productivity, economic growth, low inflation, and more jobs. And we mustn't change our minds now for the sake of short-term popularity. And those that bask in their short-term popularity and neglect the need for sound economic measures will live to rue the day hereafter. But only by keeping our nerve and sticking to the determined policies that we put in place over the last couple of years will we be able to enjoy the full fruits of improved economic performance in the rising prosperity and lower unemployment. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me deal first with inflation. Low inflation creates a climate of stability which encourages savings and investment in the future of this country. And nothing would be more damaging than if we let inflation off the leash again, only to have another dose of bitter anti-inflationary medicine. The British experience is that high inflation has brought economic recovery to a halt 3 times over the past 20 years. That's 3 times too often for my liking. And while we've succeeded in bringing inflation down to levels that were last seen when England won the World Cup, we must never take that for granted. Well, before that game, I had lived in a low inflation economy. After that game came Harold Wilson, so far as politics were concerned. But I live in a low inflation economy again now. And I'm glad to say that our inflation rate is now well below the European average. We need to keep up this performance if we're to be a competitive manufacturing nation enjoying the living standards of the best in future. I will therefore, Mr. Deputy Speaker, continue to set interest rates to meet our objective of keeping underlying inflation in a range of 1 to 4%, and in the lower half of that range by the end of the present Parliament. That's a tough target by Britain's recent standards, but not by those of some of our best competitors. To make sure we achieve it, I've backed good intentions and resolve with a number of important decisions over the last year that have strengthened the framework of policy. The Bank of England's quarterly inflation report is now fully independent of the Treasury. The Governor decides the precise timing of interest rate changes. And most importantly, I decided in the spring to publish the minutes of my meetings with the Governor. As a result, we in Britain now have one of the most open frameworks for monetary policy making in the world. And this will stand us in good stead in keeping inflation permanently low. But it will most certainly not avoid the need to take tough decisions at times. In September, the Governor and I agreed that with the recovery strengthening at home and prices rising abroad, there was a sufficient risk of inflation picking up here to justify raising interest rates then by 0.5%. By acting before retail price inflation itself picks up, we will aim to nip inflation in the bud. I expect inflation to rise slightly over the next year, reaching a temporary plateau of around 2.5%. That's a result of higher commodity prices and stronger profit margins in our very buoyant manufacturing industries. But continuing competitive pressures will ensure that producers and retailers keep costs under control and pass on the benefit to consumers. And I expect that underlying inflation should then resume its downward trend. Now, before I turn on from inflation to public finances, I can announce an important further development of the gilts market. The Bank of England is publishing today a consultative document on the establishment of an open sale and repurchase, the so-called repo market. This should improve both liquidity and efficiency, reducing yields and hence reducing the government's debt interest costs. And each reduction in yields, just 1 basis point, which is 1/100th of 1%, will eventually save more than £25 million a year of public expenditure. But I turn now to the public finances. Last year, I continued the process started by my right honourable friend, the member for Kingston-on-Thames. I announced measures which cut the public sector borrowing requirement by 1.25% of GDP by the end of this Parliament. Combined with the healthy growth in the economy that we're now enjoying, those measures have helped bring the public sector borrowing requirement from £45.5 billion in 1993 to 1994 to an expected £34.5 billion this year. My objective remains the same: to balance the budget over the medium term. Now, we remain on course to eliminate government borrowing entirely by the end of the decade. By 1996 to 97, borrowing will be approximately equal to the government's net capital expenditure. About half of my own cuts in public borrowing last year were achieved through cutting public spending plans. But because of the length of the recession, my right honourable friend and I also had to raise taxes to meet the objective of healthy public finances. Delay and failure to act would have caused since then intolerable additional pressures to raise interest rates faster and to raise taxation still further. We wouldn't have had strong and sustainable recovery now if we had failed to cut spending and raise taxes last year. And for that reason, the public spending cuts and the tax increases that I announced last year remain, of course, quite essential to the strategy of achieving economic recovery. We've restored confidence in our ability to achieve sustained recovery by the process of taking firm measures. And we would damage that confidence again if we now seem to falter or even to go back on any of the measures that we've already put in hand. Now, I am able to improve the package of help that I announced last year to cushion the effects of VAT on fuel on all pensioners and on vulnerable groups, enormous though that package was when I announced it last year. Last year, I doubled public spending on the very effective home energy efficiency scheme. So for the first time, everyone over the age of 60 became eligible for a grant. This has been a huge success. Soon, over 1 million people will have received grants to improve the insulation of their homes, reducing their excessive heating bills and improving their comfort. That's still not enough. Therefore, on top of last year's doubling, which will of course be carried forward each year, now going to add another £10 million a year to the resources to fund grants. Soon, Mr. Deputy Speaker, British homes will at last be a match to the British weather in every part of the United Kingdom, especially for the elderly. Cold weather payments were set at £6 each week only 2 years ago. I now intend to increase them to £8.50 each week in order to reassure people they will get help with their bills when spells of freezing weather occur. Now, furthermore, next year, 1995 to 96, there'll be an additional £52 for single pensioners and £73 for couples built into all retirement pensions as compensation for VAT on fuel. From April 1996, there will be £68 extra on the single pensioner rate and £96 extra for pensioner couples. Now, that's more than the whole of the VAT on fuel bills for a significant number of them. In addition, electricity prices have been falling for many people. Gas prices are to be raised for the first time since 1991, but this will be coupled with discounts for prompt payment that will reduce many people's bills. So far, the House should appreciate that including the first stage of VAT, the 8% already in payment, both gas and electricity bills have fallen by 1% in real terms over the last 2 years. And that real terms fall is for everybody, before taking into account the package of help for pensioners that's so far in payment. And the full burden of the tax is, of course, only borne by people of working age who are not receiving means-tested benefits. And I made it quite clear that people of working age can't expect tax cuts or a reverse of previously announced tax increases this year. So I'd now like to turn this year's budget to the government's new plans for public spending. Last year's budget set a new milestone in the control of public spending. We managed to reduce the control totals that had been set in the previous spending round by £8 billion over 3 years. And we reduced general government expenditure by £15 billion over the same period. And that was a measure of the success of the new system of public expenditure control that we first introduced in 1992. Last year was the first fruits of the programme of fundamental reviews of all departments. A reaction to this new approach was very predictable. A welcome from this side of the House, criticism and alarmist nonsense from the party opposite, and scepticism from the so-called experts who doubted whether those plans could be delivered in practice. Well, in fact, for the current year, first year, following on from last year's announcement, 1994 to 1995, we expect to do better than the plans that were set, and we expect to underspend by more than £1 billion. Now, at the start of this year's survey, Cabinet decided that we should also keep within last year's planned totals for 1995 to 96 and for 1996 to 97, and we should allow no more than 1% real growth for 1997 to 1998. Plans I'm about to announce deliver that remit, but it hasn't been easy. Last year's settlement was extremely tight, and I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, for his skillful handling of what has been an extremely difficult spending round. Now, we've been guided by 4 basic principles this year. Firstly, we've taken advantage of the welcome fall in inflation since the last budget. Thanks to lower inflation, the price levels we'll be facing in 1995 to 1996 will be 2.5% lower than we expected they would be when we decided on spending plans last year. We have not let that feed through into a higher level of real resources for government departments. We've reduced our cash plans for almost all programs. Lower inflation needs to be matched in the public sector by lower cash spending. Second principle is that we built on the increasingly important role played by private finance. All government departments are now looking actively at private finance options for their capital expenditure. Third, we focused our search for savings on administrative and running costs, cutting the back office and protecting the frontline delivery of our key public services. Our aim has been to provide a better output of public services for fewer inputs. Fourthly, we've taken a close look at the government's own spending priorities. We've looked for savings on some programs so that resources can be channeled into the services and policies to which the government attaches most importance. The honourable gentleman reacted to my mention of private finance. Mr. Deputy Speaker, privatisation and private finance for capital investment are rapidly becoming the chosen method for raising the quality of public services in the majority of countries in every continent in the world. They started in this country, although the political debate here has been transformed since I first became a minister. An irritating amount of post-socialist resistance still persists here. But fortunately, the Honourable Gentleman for Kingston and Hull will welcome the news that the government's private finance initiative remains alive and well and is growing rapidly. Now, last year I announced the number of transport schemes would go ahead under the private finance initiative, and significant progress has been made. £370 million of private capital has been invested in transport projects over the last 2 years, with a further £760 million already committed. In addition, £3.5 billion worth of projects are currently out to competition, and the value of contracts placed will steadily build up from a stream to a significant flow. But the private, Honourable Gentleman doesn't look so cheerful. The private finance actually runs wider than transport. There are now over 50 health projects, either approved or completed, bringing over £100 million worth of new capital into the National Health Service. Bids have been received for the first 2 privately financed prisons, and over £1 billion worth of information technology projects are now following or considering the private finance route. In higher education, universities now get approaching a third of their revenue from the private sector, and my right honourable friend, the Environment Secretary, announced on the 31st of October new proposals to make it easier for local authorities to form joint ventures with the private sector. New projects are constantly emerging as the initiative breaks new ground. Today I can announce that we're on course to let contracts in 1995 under the Private Finance Initiative, leading to about £5 billion worth of capital investment. We said we could do it, we introduced it, and we are doing it. The growing importance of private finance has helped us to find significant savings for the taxpayer in the transport programme. Over recent years, we've seen a huge increase in public expenditure on the trunk roads and motorway programme, which has risen by 1/2 in real terms each year over the last 10 years. This was essential to tackle traffic bottlenecks and to reduce costs on British industry seeking to get goods to markets at home and abroad. Now that the main need of the economy is control of public spending and borrowing, we can't carry on pumping in the same amount of taxpayers' money. We've therefore significantly reduced the planned public spending on trunk roads and motorways. Even so, public spending on such roads, without taking account of the expected contribution from the Private Finance Initiative, will be considerably higher in real terms than the average level of provision that we used to make in the 1980s. Rapid progress with private finance to design, build, finance and operate roads will take provision still higher, and the first 4 DBFO schemes will shortly go out to tender. Private finance will also now play an increasingly major role in London Underground investment. In particular, I'm pleased to report that the private finance competition for the provision of a new Northern Line train service has proceeded very rapidly. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, will be able to announce a decision very soon. This, together with future deals, should improve the quality of London Underground investment as well as the quantity of investment in the Underground. In addition to the contribution from private finance, the plans in the budget imply total investment in the Underground network next financial year of around £1 billion. The budget also takes account of the key effects expected to arise from rail privatisation, not least the privatisation of Railtrack within the lifetime of this Parliament, as announced by my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, last week. As has been the case with other privatisations, rail privatisation will bring benefits to passengers from more efficient management, bearing down on costs, and being more responsive to passenger needs. Mr. Deputy Speaker, private finance will play an increasingly important role in financing better infrastructure for public services in coming years. I now turn to the need for firm control of the government's current, as opposed to its capital, spending. One of our key objectives this year has been to intensify the search for savings on administrative and running costs. My right honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, joined the Treasury team from the Ministry of Defence, where he played last year a lead role in preparing the Defence Costs Study. That experience served him well. The success of the Defence Costs Study is just one example, a very successful example, of how key programme objectives can be protected by bearing down on the administrative costs of delivering them. The outcome has been a substantial benefit both for the taxpayer and for the front line. The defence plans in the budget fully cover the costs of the important equipment orders the Secretary of State for Defence announced in his statement to the House in July. And indeed, taking account of the changes in inflation since last year, these plans actually allow a slightly higher real terms level of spending than implied by the plan's last budget, accommodating the costs of military redundancies associated with the Defence Costs Study. Now, improvements in the efficiency of delivering services is a policy that must apply throughout the public sector. The plans in this budget reflect the results of a rigorous scrutiny of the government's own administrative costs. It must be right for modern government to modernise its own management structures and to get its own overhead costs down. As last year, we've maintained the policy that the pressure from pay and price increases should be met by greater efficiency or other economies. This has already allowed public services to achieve very reasonable pay settlements that reflect low levels of inflation and allow modest increases in real earnings. It's ridiculous to describe this long overdue and sensible practice as a pay freeze. But in total, the plans in this budget are for central government running costs not to rise in cash terms over the 4-year period from 1993 to 94 to 1997 to 98, taken as a whole. This represents a real terms reduction in those running costs of more than 10%. That's 10% from the cost of government. It's consistent with the Civil Service White Paper expectation that total civil service staff numbers will fall significantly below 500,000 over the next 4 years to their lowest levels since the war. Now, it's only right that local government should follow central government and take a similarly tough approach to containing its costs. The government's proposals for local authorities have been set on this basis. 1995 to 96, total standard spending in England will be 2.2% higher than this year, including provision for community care. That's perfectly reasonable after a year in which provision was far better than local authorities expected or that they planned for because of the government's success in reducing inflation. As in central government, local authorities will need to pursue opportunities for savings rigorously. Local authorities have substantial scope for improvements in efficiency and for other economies. And by that means, and by concentrating on their priority areas, they'll be able to protect key services. And the government will use its powers to cap excessive local authority budgets should that prove necessary. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for the Environment, will announce the details of the local authority government settlement on Thursday. We managed to find savings in housing capital expenditure, in particular that of the Housing Corporation. The government will comfortably exceed its election manifesto commitment on the provision of new social housing up to 1994 to 95. The new plans will still allow a substantial social housing programme to continue, assisted by the corporation's success in levering in private finance. Against the background of steadily falling unemployment, it's also been possible to make economies in the employment programme, while still improving the quality of the programmes that are provided. A major reform of training for unemployed adults, based on payment by results, will seek to ensure that more trainees get jobs when they finish their courses. Now, as a result of the announcements in last year's budget, we're already down the track of a thoroughgoing reform of the Social Security benefit system. We intend to ensure that it's better targeted on today's real needs, and we intend to make it simpler and less susceptible to abuse. Legislation to reform statutory sick pay and to introduce a new incapacity benefit was enacted last session. This session will see the passage of the Job Seekers Allowance Bill and a major pensions bill to modernise the framework for both state and occupational provision. Now, tomorrow, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Social Security, will announce the details of the next phase of this programme of social security reform. And I wish to mention now 3 of the initiatives that he will be announcing from which I expect substantial public spending savings to flow. First, housing benefit. My right honourable friend will be announcing tomorrow a reform of the arrangements through which the general taxpayer subsidises local authorities' payment of housing benefit to the tenants of private landlords. The effect of this will be that authorities will not be fully reimbursed if they pay housing benefit on rents that are significantly above the average for the area and the type of property. Local authorities will therefore scale back the benefit they actually pay in line with the new restriction on central government subsidy. They will, however, retain discretion and have some funding to pay the full rent in individual circumstances which they, the local authorities, consider justified. The previous arrangements meant that neither the landlord nor the tenant usually had any incentive at all to negotiate a lower rent, because housing benefit would usually pay the rent in full. And this has had the inevitable effect, as seems to be acknowledged, of driving up rents and public expenditure. I see I have a welcome reform, because at the moment, the Social Security budget sometimes pays the rent in full in cases where the rent's far above the average rent for property of that type in the neighbourhood. In future, people on housing benefit will have an incentive to make the same judgments about what they can afford as people who have to pay all their own rent. And the system will no longer be a prey to the unscrupulous landlord. And the reform will take effect from October 1995. Existing claimants remaining in the same property where they live now will not be affected. And my right honourable friend will be glad to hear the encouraging response that's come from the benches opposite. Secondly, let me see how far I can take the Labour Party down the process of social security reform. Secondly, my right honourable friend will be announcing tomorrow further measures to limit support for mortgage interest through the income support system, so as to constrain the cost to the taxpayer and to minimise the distortion to work incentives. Most people are readily able to insure their mortgage interest payments, if they wish, against periods of sickness or unemployment, and many people already do so. For new mortgages taken out by people of working age after October 1995, support will not normally be available for the first 9 months, although my right honourable friend will be consulting on the precise arrangements, including different treatment for circumstances in which insurance might not be available. There will also be some scaling back of support for existing borrowers. One reason why insurance hasn't become more widespread is because the taxpayer has picked up the interest bill too readily in too many cases. This change will give more borrowers an incentive to ensure that the mortgage costs of people who are temporarily unable to keep up with their payments will be met by the borrowers themselves and by lenders rather than by the taxpayer. Thirdly, my right honourable friend will also be announcing a major intensification of the war against fraud in the social security system. And we're already saving £700 million a year from our existing efforts. The further measures on fraud, which include a major project to pay benefits in post offices by electronic means rather than by paper transactions, will at a cost of £300 million save another £2.5 billion over the next 3 years. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the government know that firm control of public spending and reduced public borrowing is essential to sustained recovery, prosperity and jobs. And will also show that strong control of public spending overall can be combined with improvements in key public services selected as government priorities. The Department for Education provision will increase in real terms by almost 1% next year. The government's intent on extending its significant achievements in education, but we've also managed to find savings in parts of the education programme. Almost 1 in 3 young people are now going to university, compared with 1 in 8 in 1979. That is a remarkable achievement. A period of consolidation to secure quality and standards is now required after a period of very rapid expansion. However, the overall package of student grants and loans will once again increase in line with inflation. There will be continued growth in student numbers in further education, again to record levels. And the new plans also allow for further growth in the number of grant-maintained schools and for additional capital spending in our schools. The government continues to attach high priority to spending on law and order. The new plans for the Home Office increased provision for the police by 3% in 1995 to 96. Major efficiency improvements from the SHE proposals will enable more police officers to be released for frontline duties. And the reforms to be implemented next year will give chief constables much greater freedom to manage their own increased resources and to respond more effectively to the public's priorities. As a former minister with responsibilities for the inner cities, I'm pleased to say that within the single regeneration budget, we found extra resources to support new projects in our rundown urban areas and elsewhere. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for the Environment, will be providing for more projects under the current bidding round, and he'll be able to conduct a second round of bidding with funds starting in 1996 to 1997. In all, there will be over £800 million for new regeneration projects over the next 3 years. This brings me finally on public spending to the government's plans for the health service. With inflation so much lower than expected this year than last, it would have been perfectly possible for us to reduce our previous plans for health and still to meet our manifesto commitment to real growth in resources for the National Health Service each year. Because of the high priority that we give to the National Health Service, we've decided not to claw back the unexpected provision in this way. Instead, the Health Service will keep the unplanned bonus it's had this year from lower inflation. I'll spell out what this means. This means that next year, spending on the National Health Service will grow by £1.3 billion. That's 1% growth in real terms against the 0.5% increase that we originally allowed for in last year's budget. And it will come on top of a real increase of 3.75% this year because of the drop of inflation. So in addition to the extra money from the taxpayer, the health service continues to benefit from the improvements in performance flowing from the government's reforms. Further improvements in efficiency are expected to release at least £600 million extra for patient care next year. All these savings, including gains from rationalising management and administration costs throughout the department and throughout the National Health Service, are ploughed back into patient care. And these extra funds, top of the extra provision that I've announced, the extra funds that are achieved from savings coming from a variety of measures have only one thing in common. All those savings, and therefore all the extra funds, have so far been opposed by the party opposite. But all this means, the extra provision and the savings, that next year we shall all benefit from an even better financed health service, which has seen real increases in spending upon it by the taxpayers in every year since this government took power. It will be delivering even better standards of patient care, with further improvements in patients' charter standards and more progress in reducing waiting times. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, at the beginning of this speech, I said the combination of healthy growth and low inflation that we're now seeing is virtually unprecedented in Britain's recent past, and few doubt the strength of the recovery. But everyone in touch with the real world knows that the benefits of recovery have yet to feed through to many people in this country. Unemployment remains far too high. Thanks to the labour market and to the trade union reforms of the 1980s, unemployment did start falling at a much earlier stage of this recovery than it had in previous recoveries. And unlike other European countries, we've resisted pressures to add social costs on top of wage costs for our employers. Unemployment will, of course, fall further as the economy recovers. But I've long believed, as my panel of independent forecasters points out, and as I think is now widely recognised, that demand expansion on its own isn't enough to produce a sufficient fall in unemployment. We have to do more to reduce unemployment in ways which are consistent with sustained growth and low inflation. Now, I've been making speeches on this, and I've been giving lectures ever since I became Chancellor on the need to ensure that we don't have recovery without jobs. But as well as giving speeches, I've already done something about it. In my last budget, I did three things. I announced measures to make it harder for people who are quite capable of working to stay on benefit without looking for a job. That's at the heart of the job seekers allowance. I made it easier for people with children to take jobs by introducing a childcare allowance into family credit. And I made it cheaper for employers to give people work by cutting the lower rates of employers' national insurance contributions by a full percentage point. Now, in this budget, I want to do more on all three fronts. We must get people back into work and out of dependency on benefit. We must reduce the cost, not increase, the cost to employers of employing people who've been out of work. And I aim to ensure that we don't have a class of people in this country who are excluded from economic activity. Now, the first step is to encourage employers to look more favourably on people who've been out of work for some time. I can announce, therefore, a wholly new incentive to encourage employers to take on more people who've been unemployed for 2 years or more. In future, employers will get a full national insurance rebate for up to a year for taking on such a person. That will provide employers with an important new reason to give a second chance to someone who's been unemployed for some length of time. You've been very late on the scene, which we've been working on for a long time, and you've got... Yeah. And you have got most of it wrong. I'm going to announce a package. I'm going to announce a package which will show you how to do it. This first year, whole year, National Insurance Contribution Holiday will run from April 1996. And more immediately, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Employment, intends to develop new pilots under the Work Start scheme. This offers employers a grant to recruit people who've been unemployed for over 2 years. There will be around 5,000 new job opportunities. Experience with the existing pilots that we've been running suggests that the scheme helps to break down the prejudice which can blight the long-term unemployed. But I know that some employers will still worry that people who've been unemployed a long time may have lost the habit of working. We introduced the work trial scheme to counter that. It allows unemployed people to try out a new job for 3 weeks without losing their benefit, keeping their benefit entitlement. It costs employers nothing for that 3 weeks, and it lets employers see for themselves whether the people they take on can be relied on to hold down a steady job. The record so far is impressive. A large number of people are kept on at the end of the trial period. So I propose to expand the scheme to provide 150,000 job opportunities over the next 3 years. In addition, I propose a further cut in the lower rates of employers' national insurance contributions for every employee. From next April, they will come down by another 0.6%. This will reduce the cost to employers of providing lower paid jobs by another £230 million in 1995 to 96, on top of the reduction of £940 million carried through from 1994 to 95. It must make sense to keep on cutting the burden on employers who create jobs, and in particular on those employers who provide jobs for less skilled people. And the party opposite keeps wanting to go in the opposite direction by increasing costs on employers with a minimum wage and the social chapter. I need to match these incentives to employers with measures to ensure that people get the rewards to which they're entitled when they move from unemployment into work. First, we need to ensure that people are kept in touch with the labour market and don't stay on benefit unnecessarily. The job seekers allowance will reinforce the link between claiming benefit and looking for work. It will be supported by an unprecedented range of measures to help the unemployed. One of our existing measures, community action, was due to finish next year. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Employment, has decided to extend the scheme in revised form. It will provide work experience and a route back to jobs for about 40,000 long-term unemployed people each year. We introduced Restart when I was Minister of Employment in 1986. That required people who've been on benefit for a long time to come in for an interview and advice, help to get back into work. It gave positive help to many people and got many people back into work. It also revealed that some couldn't be bothered to come for the interview. They lost benefit. For young unemployed people, we've been experimenting with similar schemes called WorkWise and One-to-One. We propose to extend them nationwide. But it has to be worth people's while to take jobs. I also intend to introduce new measures to ensure that people aren't deterred by genuine short-term financial problems when they try to move from unemployment into work. Anyone moving from benefit into a low-paid job is likely to be better off, but it may not seem like it to the man or woman concerned. No. The first thing that happens when a person takes a new job is that income support disappears, and with it all help with the cost of housing and their council tax. In due course, the person in the new job may be entitled to family credit and to housing benefit, but at the moment it can be hard to find out how much that will be or when it will actually come. In the meantime, the person concerned has all the expenses of getting to work, buying clothes or tools, traveling to work, and so on. And time again, I've had people tell me this is a major deterrent to taking a job, and they really can't afford to take a job because of these gaps in the system. I have a number of measures to help. I propose to speed up the payment of family credit so that anyone who takes a job can be sure of getting the benefit to which they're entitled and getting it quickly. I propose to enable people who take a job to go on getting the same help with their rent and council tax as they had on income support for their first 4 weeks in the new job. I propose to speed up the payment thereafter of housing benefit so they can be quite sure where they stand at the end of the 4 weeks. I propose to exempt from tax the back-to-work bonus, which my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Social Security, announced in October. That will give people who've been unemployed but have managed to do a bit of part-time work whilst receiving their benefit to have a lump sum when they leave benefit and take a job. I also propose to expand the number of grants available to people who take jobs to cover their start-up costs. These are known as job finders grants. I propose to make available around 25,000 grants of an average of £200 for those who've been unemployed for more than 2 years. Family credit's been an important and effective way of encouraging lone parents and couples with children to take employment. By providing top-up benefit for those in work, it makes it worthwhile to give up unemployment and benefit dependency. At the moment, it helps 500,000 people. Last year, I improved family credit by announcing the new childcare allowance, which was introduced in October. I now intend to give low-paid and unemployed people with families an incentive to take full-time work. The existing structure of family credit strongly favours part-time rather than full-time working. But the majority of people who've been unemployed long-term are people who need to find full-time work. I therefore intend to introduce a £10 a week premium for full-time workers on family credit to give a new incentive to take full-time work rather than stay on benefit. This will also give a substantial boost to the incomes of 345,000 low-paid families with children. But childless couples and single people account for 2/3 of the long-term unemployed. And these people, of course, can't at present claim family credit. So I'd like to examine whether introducing a new in-work benefit for childless people would be effective. Now, this is obviously a very big step, and I've agreed with my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Social Security, that we should try it out on an experimental basis. We intend to test run a new benefit through a pilot scheme covering 20,000 people. If the pilot shows that the benefit helps to get childless couples and single people back into work, we will then consider introducing a national scheme. I've also been impressed by an imaginative scheme pioneered by the Training and Enterprise Council in Lincolnshire. This helps people build up full-time work by passing together a number of part-time jobs. The scheme's known in Lincolnshire as Job Match. I propose to extend it to help up to 3,000 people a year. Now, overall, Mr. Deputy Speaker, these measures constitute an extremely important and carefully thought out package of support for unemployed people in this country. It's no longer credible for some people to campaign for reductions in long-term unemployment and to reduce benefit dependency without having effective policies to deal with it. The days of priming the pump all comes into effect steadily from this budget. The details will be announced by my right honourable friends, the Secretaries of State for Employment and Social Security. There is a Social Security statement tomorrow in the usual way. The days of priming the pump to cut unemployment are long since past. What this government is doing is building reforms on reforms to remove at last the distortions and anomalies from the benefit system which discourage so many unemployed people from taking jobs. This package aims to lift people from dependency into work and to smooth the transition from out-of-work benefits to modest in-work benefits. And the measures will work because they're carefully put together and they're affordable, and because they're being introduced at a time of strong economic recovery based on our sound economic policies so that more jobs are becoming available. They're a set of effective policies to tackle the big problem of structural unemployment which faces the whole Western world. And I believe in this country we're ahead of other countries in tackling it. And I'm sure they will eventually gain widespread support, even from those who have no practicable ideas of their own. And members opposite, I hear from their interruptions, still don't understand. If you look to the minimum wage, if you look to the social chapter, if you load costs on those employers who might otherwise create low-paid jobs, you make matters worse. We're giving incentives to create jobs and making the transition from unemployment to work easier. We started work before the Borry Commission. We've come up with better recommendations, and the Borry Commission and the Labour Party have a long way to go before they even understand how the system works. Let me turn now to my proposals for taxation. Happily, in this year's budget, I have no need to raise revenue overall in order to secure the public finances. The action in last year's budget, combined with a firm approach to public spending, will see to that. But nor, as I have already made clear publicly, are significant tax cuts justified this year. But I do have a number of proposals to ensure that we raise the necessary revenue in ways which do least damage to the economy while helping vulnerable groups. Well, I'm delighted that there now appears to be a wide political consensus in this House on the need to close loopholes and to prevent the artificial avoidance of taxation. There is, I have to say, in some quarters, a tendency to exaggerate the extent of tax avoidance by including proposals, as the Honourable Gentleman always does, that would actually impose extra taxes on legitimate business under the guise of a crackdown on so-called loopholes. But I've said before and demonstrated before that we're no friends to the tax avoidance industry. Last year, I announced a number of measures to close genuine loopholes, raising £2 billion over 3 years. This year, I intend to go further by tackling the artificial avoidance of VAT on property transactions and share issues, by stopping the purchase of companies simply to make use of their surplus management expenses, and by preventing tax avoidance through operations with discounted securities. In total, the anti-avoidance measures in this budget will yield an additional £1.5 billion in the next 3 years. And we'll continue to close down genuine loopholes wherever we may find them. I have some major proposals on vehicle excise duty this year. Few things, Mr. Deputy Speaker, annoy honest motorists more than knowing that many people still drive without a tax disc and waste the time of police and the authorities in trying to track them down. Earlier this year, my right honourable friend, the former Secretary of State for Transport, announced that the government intended to move to continuous licensing. That means licensing on possession rather than the use of a vehicle. And we'll be issuing a consultation paper setting out how we intend to do this. The move's designed to combat evasion and to help fight crime by enabling the police accurately to check the ownership of vehicles. I can, however, reassure the House that we will not seek to disadvantage those motorists, including classic car owners, who don't pay vehicle excise duty now because their cars are genuinely off the road. I also intend to bring up to date the system of concessions and exemptions from vehicle excise duty. The existing highly complex arrangements go back in some cases to before the Second World War, and they have very little relevance to the modern world. The number of different concessionary classes will be reduced from 132 to 9, a simplified and sensible handful. This will come into effect from the 1st of July 1995 and will yield about £30 million a year. But the House will be pleased to hear that special treatment will still apply to cars for disabled drivers and emergency vehicles. Moreover, I've also decided that accessories for the disabled fitted in company cars will no longer be taxed as a benefit in kind from next April. I propose to increase the rate of vehicle excise duty for cars, the tax disc, by £5 to £135. But to avoid adding to industry's costs, lorry duty rates will again remain unchanged. I propose to introduce a significant change to one part of VAT relating to cars. Since 1992, taxi and car hire firms, unlike most businesses, have been able to recover the VAT on their cars. In response to the industry's concerns about market distortion, I propose to extend this to cars bought by any business wholly for business use. This will mainly affect leased cars, with consequential changes to their VAT treatment when sold or leased on. The change should be revenue neutral in the long run, but it will cost £140 million in the first year. In my last budget, I announced that road fuel duties would increase on average by at least 5% in real terms in future budgets. This year, I intend to stick to that commitment. It's an essential part of the plans that I set out last year to deliver healthy public finances as quickly as possible. It also forms an important part of the government's strategy to return carbon dioxide emissions to their 1990 level in the year 2000. From 6 o'clock this evening, petrol prices will therefore go up by 2.5 pence a litre for both leaded and unleaded petrol, taking into account the effect of VAT. In recent years, there's been a small differential between the duty on diesel and the duty on unleaded petrol. The differential is clearly becoming very difficult to justify in economic terms, in health terms, or environmental terms. I therefore propose to tax diesel at the same rate as unleaded petrol, and this means an increase of about 3 pence a litre on diesel. I also propose to increase the duty on gas oil and fuel oil by half a pence a litre, which will raise £70 million a year. I propose, however, to freeze the duty on road fuel gases. I turn next to duties on tobacco. The government's committed to reducing smoking, and I continue to believe that higher tax is the most effective and fair means of doing so. Last year, I said that I intended to increase tobacco duties by at least 3% in real terms on average a year. I intend to stick to that commitment today. Tax on cigarettes will therefore increase by 10 pence on a packet of 20 from 6 o'clock tonight. Duty on other tobacco products will go up by a similar proportion. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the single European market has brought real benefits to British industry. Through an expanded market for business, increased competition, reduced bureaucracy at frontiers and cheaper transport costs, and these have all greatly benefited our consumers. But one of the most widely publicised other effects of the single market has been the increase in legitimate cross-border shopping in alcohol and tobacco and in smuggling. Both of these have inevitably meant some loss of duty to the exchequer and pressures on the British drinks industry and some damage to British business. And no Chancellor can remain unmoved in the face of this. But neither can any Chancellor simply adopt popular measures to cut taxes on alcohol that would threaten the revenue and require taxes on other goods to be raised. In the longer term, the solution is for the government to work with our European partners to bring duties more in line. And the forthcoming review of Europe-wide minimum excise duties gives us the opportunity to make a start on this. But this year, pending that, I've once again listened to the concerns of the industries. I propose no increase in the duties on beer, table wine, and spirits. And this will mean that the proportion of the cost of an alcoholic drink represented by tax in this country will continue to fall. 10 years ago, 37% of the price of a pint of beer was taxed. Today, it's only 30%. The government also intends to modernise and deregulate betting and gaming. This process is, in my opinion, welcome and much overdue. But the coverage of taxation must also keep up to date with the modern world. I therefore propose to widen the coverage of gaming machine licence duty to cover amusement machines such as arcade video games. It's anomalous that we should tax amusement machines with prizes, but not those without prizes. I'm sure this measure will be welcomed by many parents, although maybe not by all children. Gaming machine licence duty has only been increased once since 1987. I propose to restore its real value to the 1987 level, but at the same time to allow payment by instalments. And these measures will raise around £60 million in a full year. In 1991, my right honourable friend, the member for Kingston upon Thames, announced a reduction in pools betting duty of 2.5%. Since then, this has helped to fund the Foundation for Sport and the Arts. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for National Heritage, and I have now reviewed this reduction. We've agreed that it should continue for a further 5 years, provided that the pools companies also continue to fund sport and the arts at their present level. Well, many of my honourable friends appreciate, as I do, that the Foundation continues to support a number of worthwhile projects to encourage participation in sport and the arts, and I'm delighted that the pools companies have generously reaffirmed their commitment. Mr. Deputy Speaker, a strong and thriving business community is the only way to ensure a strong and thriving economy. This government has a record of achievement in developing the tax system in ways which improve competitiveness, sharpen incentives, simplify administration, and encourage the small and medium-sized businesses which are so important to the future development of the economy. I'd like to announce a package of measures today which will add further to the strength of British industry. Decisions on many of the measures I shall be announcing today have been informed by the Industrial Finance Initiative undertaken last year by my honourable friend, the Minister of State, by my right honourable friend, the Financial Secretary, and by his predecessor. Firstly, I'd like to say a few words about corporation tax and capital allowances. We have one of the lowest corporation tax rates in the industrialised world. Low tax rates are good for incentives. They mean businesses can keep more of their profits to use as they, the businesses, want. Since 1984, we've cut the main corporation tax rate from 52% to 33%, while scaling back capital allowances to a level broadly matching commercial depreciation. I've considered again all the calls for increased allowances to encourage investment, and that they have a simplistic appeal, in my opinion. But I remain firmly of the opinion that increasing capital allowances would distort investment decisions and wouldn't encourage the high-quality investment needed to improve economic performance. A narrower tax base which it would produce would also jeopardize our ability to maintain the low tax rates which have helped to transform British industry over the last decade. The change made by my right honourable friend, former right honourable friend, now Lord Lawson, from high capital allowances to low rates of corporation tax has been very successful. I propose to maintain that emphasis on low rates for the successful rather than high allowances for all in our system of business taxes. I also have no changes to announce on the rate of advanced corporation tax or the value of the tax credit on dividends. But I would now like to deal with business rates. We're about to implement the first 5-yearly review of valuations of properties for rating purposes. If we didn't have these 5-year reviews, the rate base would become hopelessly out of date. And the property market's changed a lot over the past 5 years, with wide regional variations. As a result of the review, many properties in the south of England from now on will begin to see reductions in their rate bills. Some businesses in the Midlands, the North, Scotland and Wales will benefit as well. But others in those regions will discover that up-to-date valuations will raise their liability. Now, I'm glad to say that I will be able to continue to find resources to help businesses through this new transition period in the same way that we've been helping business through the transition from the last revaluation. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for the Environment, my right honourable friends, the Secretaries of State for Scotland and Wales, will announce details of the new scheme later today. But I can tell the House now that increases in bills will be limited to 10% in any 1 year for large properties once adjusted for inflation. Small business properties account for 3/4 of those receiving protection, and we've decided to limit real increases for such properties to 7.5%. This protection will in part be financed by limiting real reductions in rates bills for large properties to 5% and for small properties to 10% in any 1 year. But the revenue from limiting gains isn't enough to help those businesses who happen to find themselves worse off as a result of more up-to-date valuations. I've therefore decided to provide revenue assistance of £605 million next year to finance the transitional relief, similar to the amount we were spending on the former transitional relief scheme this year. I laid stress at the beginning of his speech on our improved export performance. We need to build on this and not become complacent. Strong export growth will be essential if healthy recovery is to be sustained. My right honourable friend, the President of the Board of Trade, and I have taken a closer look at the services provided by the Export Credit Guarantee Department. We've agreed that a reduction in premiums of around 10% on average is possible, while still protecting taxpayers' interests. Therefore, propose to make that reduction in premiums. It will improve our competitiveness, building on the premium reductions in the last 2 years. Furthermore, we've agreed to increase the amount of ECGD cover available to many important developing markets by £300 million from 1997 to 98. Those measures will provide an added incentive for British exporters to play an even greater role in the most successful, rapidly growing economies in the world. As I said earlier, one of my main objectives to the tax system is that it should raise revenue in ways which do the least possible damage to the economy. In some cases, taxes can actually do some good by helping markets work better and by discouraging harmful or wasteful activities. Taxes can play an important role in protecting the environment. And one major problem in this country is the disposal of waste. And I would like to make an announcement today to help tackle this problem. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for the Environment, and I will issue shortly a consultation paper setting out details of a new tax to be collected by Customs and Excise on waste disposed in landfill. We propose that a new landfill tax should come into effect in 1996, and it should raise several £100 million a year. But I'm determined not to impose additional costs on business overall. I shall therefore be looking at ways, when we raise the revenue, to offset the impact of the new tax by making further compensatory reductions in the level of employer national insurance contributions when the new tax is introduced. In brief, what I'm proposing is to raise tax on polluters to make further cuts in the tax on jobs over and above the taxes I've already reduced. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have more measures to help small businesses in particular. The need to focus on smaller firms with growth potential has been an extremely important theme of the Industrial Finance Initiative. It's absolutely essential that we have a healthy and vigorous small firm sector in this country for the future economic well-being of the country and to achieve higher levels of employment. Now, one important way in which we can help small businesses is by encouraging the venture capital industry. A flourishing venture capital industry plays a key role in promoting job creation, innovation, and growth. And the British venture capital industry has been growing in recent years, and I'm determined that are aimed at encouraging equity investment in small companies, and I want to build on them today. The new enterprise investment scheme is now already in place, offering tax relief for investment in unquoted trading companies. Over 40% of the schemes set up so far involve so-called business angels who want to invest their own personal expertise as well as their money in a small growing business. That's a good start, but the scheme's got some complex rules, and I have decided to simplify them. I'm also extending capital gains tax reinvestment relief to the enterprise investment scheme, which should increase still further its attractiveness. I've consulted widely on venture capital trusts, and the response has been very positive. I've accepted suggestions for change on some details, and I propose to implement the scheme in full. But I want to go further by making investment through these trusts in risk capital even more attractive than I originally contemplated when I announced the consultation period. Investment up to £100,000 a year in new shares in a venture capital trust will therefore offer 20% upfront income tax relief and capital gains tax reinvestment relief, in addition to tax-free dividends and capital gains. I believe that venture capital trusts will make a successful contribution to filling a gap in our enterprise economy by encouraging more people to become venture capitalists. The cost of the new scheme, venture capital trusts, is expected to be £150 million next year, rising to £290 million in 1996-97. Of course, those costs have to be based on an estimate of the take-up, but we expect considerable take-up. It could mean that funds of £2.5 billion might be raised over the next 3 years, providing much more investment where it is most needed in our small, growing, technologically advanced and innovative companies. My proposals go significantly beyond what I first set out 12 months ago, and they now put in place an effective and imaginative set of measures aimed at generating equity investment in dynamic, innovative, growing businesses. They should be widely welcomed by everyone who understands how a modern free market economy works and how new jobs are created in the modern world. Unlike some honourable members, I don't describe tax reliefs of this kind to stimulate investment in business and enterprise as tax loopholes, which they're usually identified as by the honourable gentleman. During the recent recession, insolvent businesses, particularly small businesses, were too often being closed down by their creditors and jobs lost before rescue options have been properly explored. Following consultation, my right honourable friend, the President of the Board of Trade, will shortly issue a paper setting out the government's main conclusions on company rescue procedures in future. To give management more time to reorder their affairs, we'll introduce a 28-day moratorium binding on all parties. This will give companies a breathing space to assess rescue prospects and try to come to an arrangement with their creditors. We're also consulting further on a mechanism to help substitute equity for debt of firms in administration or receivership. And I hope these measures will contribute further to the creation of a rescue culture discouraging the needless and wasteful liquidation of businesses that could become sound. The impact of the 1993 changes to the loan guarantee scheme has been encouraging, but its rules are still quite rightly being criticised as too complex. Together with my right honourable friend, the President of the Board of Trade, I intend to review these rules with a view to making the scheme simpler and more attractive. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the tax system not only imposes a financial burdens on business who pay the tax, but also a regulatory burden and an overhead cost as well. And I want to reduce those burdens on businesses. Simply running PAYE and national insurance contributions is difficult for many small businesses. From next April, I propose to increase by more than 30% the threshold for businesses to make quarterly rather than monthly payments to the Inland Revenue. Now, this will benefit around 100,000 employers at a one-off one-year cost of £75 million. This means that nearly two-thirds of all employers in the country will now be able to make quarterly payments of their PAYE. I also propose to consult on a move towards annual VAT payments to small traders and to further simplification of VAT accounting. Furthermore, I intend to improve the administration of the tax system by encouraging closer working between the two revenue departments, Inland Revenue and Customs and Excise, as well as closer cooperation between the Inland Revenue and the Contributions Agency. This will all be directed at improving the service offering to business seeking to comply with their tax obligations. I'd also like to make some progress towards closer alignment of tax and national insurance. From next April, clearances given by the Inland Revenue concerning non-taxable expenses will also count for national insurance purposes. And my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Social Security, will give details of this and other measures in his statement tomorrow. I also intend to raise the registration threshold for value-added tax to £46,000 tomorrow in line with inflation. That will help a number of the smaller businesses. Finally, I turn to self-assessment. I'm publishing today for consultation some details of the remaining legislation for self-assessment. The Inland Revenue has been consulting very widely on the changes. The response has been positive, worthwhile reform to aim for. My right honourable friend, the Financial Secretary, and I intend to go ahead with our proposals and aim to keep any burden placed on employers as low as possible. Now, taken together, this latest extensive package, tax reliefs and deregulatory measures, provide a very substantial package of support for the business community. They aim to strengthen British businesses not by intervention, but by easing cash flow problems, by cutting back red tape and providing targeted help for small businesses. That's how we maintain our improved business performances, help sustain the recovery, and help to create more jobs. Mr. Deputy Speaker, higher savings also have an important role to play in helping sustain growth by providing additional resources for investment. Deputy Honourable Gentlemen, this budget contains extremely serious matters to deal with helping small business, cutting in employment, producing all the real improvements in the economy the people of this country actually want. And I'm now turning to savings. I've already announced measures to encourage savings into unquoted companies. There are two further measures I'd like to announce today. Personal equity plans have been very successful since their introduction in 1986. Over £15 billion has been invested in over 4 million plans to date. They've widened share ownership, and they've played an important role in providing finance to industry. I want to take that success further, and in particular, to widen the type of finance available to industry through PEPs. I propose that from next year, people will be able to invest through PEPs in a range of corporate bonds, convertibles and preference shares, and not simply equities. This change is expected to cost £10 million in 1995 to 96, rising to £40 million in 1997 to 98. Still on savings, when my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, introduced tax-exempt special savings accounts, or TESAs as they came to be called, it was understood that tax-free interest would be allowed to build up over a 5-year period. Some of those accounts, the 5-year period will soon be coming to an end. I've had to consider whether this tax exemption for savings should be extended. TESAs have been very popular, allowing many people to catch the savings habit to build a nest egg for their future. Over 4 million people have invested over £20 billion since they were first introduced. Given their success for popularity, I've decided that all or part of the capital accumulated in the TESA at maturity can be reinvested straight away in a new TESA. Anyone who wants to continue to save tax-free will therefore be able to do so up to an overall limit of £9,000. This measure will cost £150 million in 1996 to 97. Finally, I turn from taxation to income tax. The lower, basic and higher rates of income tax will remain unchanged in 1995 to 1996. However, we can at last begin to benefit from our steady return to healthy public finances. This means I can fully index the personal allowance, the threshold for higher rate tax, and the income limit for the age-related allowance. But I've been able to provide some additional help in two important areas. First, I want to do a little bit more for pensioners. I propose to increase the age-related personal allowance by more than indexation. The allowances for everyone aged 65 and over will be increased by £430. Nearly 3 million pensioners will gain from this at a cost of £200 million in a full year. I also propose to widen the 20p lower band to £3,200. That increase is twice the amount necessary for indexation for inflation. 1 in 5 of all taxpayers will now only pay tax at the lowest rate of 20 pence. The tax measures I'm announcing in this budget, all the tax measures I've described, reduced revenue by £1 billion in 1995 to 1996. But that's because I've had to provide £605 million, as I said, for the transitional relief for business ratepayers. I've said many times that I'd like to go further, and that I will, in due course, go further. We on this side of the House are tax cutters by instinct. But I have also made clear over and over again that tax cuts can only come when we can afford them and when it's in the interest of our industrial economy that we should make them. That means two things. We've got to continue to improve further our long-term economic performance. That's why in my budget today I've introduced numerous measures, boring the honourable gentleman for balls over, strengthening the economy and making sure that recovery is sustained and we become a powerful manufacturing and industrial economy. The second requirement is firm control of public spending. All my efforts to help businesses and to help the unemployed will be to no avail if I didn't keep a firm grip on public spending. I've already dealt with spending by each department, but I've not yet described what will happen to public spending overall as a result of our decisions. Last year's spending round delivered substantial cuts in overall public spending. This year's hasn't been easy because of that. Public spending control is not only about controlling costs, it's about choice of priorities. That is the language of politics. Within this year's settlement, my right honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, and I have succeeded in producing real increases in resources for priority programmes such as the National Health Service and the Police Service. We've also managed to protect the delivery of public services generally by focusing our search for savings on administrative costs. We've avoided our tight settlement last year being turned into a wasteful one by ensuring that success in lowering inflation doesn't simply increase the volume of spending on programmes. But I'm glad to tell the House that this approach has allowed us to make overall savings which are even greater than those achieved last year. Last year, we managed to reduce the control total by £8 billion over the 3 years. This year, we've done a bit better. Not 10, not 15, not 20, but another £24 billion off the control total over the next 3 years on top of last year's reduction. Last year, we reduced public spending plans so as to reduce general government expenditure by £15 billion over a 3-year period. This year, on top of last year's reductions, we will reduce general government expenditure by £28 billion. This is a total reduction in government expenditure over the 4 years covered by my two budgets of £43 billion. These savings have allowed me to reduce my projection for the public sector borrowing requirement. Taking into account the tax and public spending measures, I now expect to be able to reduce borrowing from £30 billion to £21.5 billion in 1995 to 96, from the previously forecast £21 billion to £13 billion in 1996 to 97, and from £12 billion to £5 billion the year after that. This reduced borrowing should provide an added stimulant to business confidence, strengthen the recovery further, and give us the healthy public finances we need to put our economy and our economic policy on course. This budget keeps Britain firmly on track for real economic growth that can last. This budget concentrates on strengthening British businesses. This budget will help to create more jobs, and it will lay the foundations for sustained rises in prosperity. I commend it, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to the House.
So the Chancellor sits down after a long and very detailed budget statement.